Hi everyone, Danielle here with a card for you today for the Coffee Lovers blog hop that was organized by our own design team member Amy Saruda. If you haven't yet, head over to her blog for all the details and be sure to link up your own coffee theme projects so you can win some prizes. Since it's coffee themed, I'm going to be using our Warm Wishes stamp set. I thought that was very appropriate for the occasion, and I'm going to be doing some embossing and paper piecing for this card. I'm going to start with this white panel of, wow, and by white I mean black, this black panel of cardstock. And since I'm embossing, I'm going to be very generous with this embossing buddy tool. Pretty much it's just filled with baby powder, and it's going to help prevent my white embossing powder from sticking anywhere I don't want it to stick. So I was really liberal with it, and I don't even worry about it because it'll wipe right off at the end. I'm going to take my Versamark ink pad and ink up the entire stamp for this part of the card. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and do my best to get it in the center of this card. And I'm going to make sure I push down really well to get lots of the Versamark ink on the paper so my embossing powder will stick really well. And I'll grab my white embossing powder and again be pretty generous with it and just scoop it on there so that the whole sentiment and the cup get covered completely, and tap it off, and then I dropped it. So I'm just going to wipe off any of the extra, and sometimes even with the embossing buddy tool that I used earlier, a few stray dots of embossing powder might stick to the card. So I like to go in sometimes with just a really teeny tiny little paintbrush and kind of brush those little flecks of embossing powder away. I stepped away for a second to actually heat emboss it because my embossing gun doesn't reach to the table anymore. So this is what it looks like after you emboss it, and I'm just going to take a dry paper towel now and wipe away all of that powder from my embossing buddy tool. And like I said earlier, I wasn't worried about how much powder was getting on my black cardstock because I knew that it would just wipe off really easily with a dry paper towel. What I want to do now is do some paper piecing. Because the panel is a little bit plain right now, it's just black and white, I want to add a pop of color. So what I'm going to do is stamp the cup from the Warm Wishes stamp, just the cup by itself, on some of this fun Christmas pattern paper. And what you could do is you could always cut your stamp apart. You could cut out the cup, ink it up, and then stamp it. But for this, I'm just going to kind of ink up the whole thing and stamp it on the pattern paper. I'm not worried about getting some of the sentiment too because I'm actually just going to cut the cup portion out for what I need it for today. And I'm going to press down really well, and I'm using my favorite VersaFine Onyx Black ink as usual. And sometimes, even though I love this ink, on pattern paper it can seem a little dull, so I'm actually going to follow it up with my I think it's my Memento black pen. So I'm just touching up some of the areas that when I stamped it didn't seem as kind of as dark. And I'm going to cut the cup out. I'm just going to set it aside for the time being. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to stamp it on white this time because I want to color the top in to make it look kind of like coffee in the cup. And then I'm going to do some paper piecing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Copics. And I have two here, and I think I can't really see them because it's blurry, but I think this one is E53, and it's just like a really, really light beige. And this one I think is E55, but I can't read the cap. I'll double check for you and put it down below. And I'm just going to quickly color in just the very top of the mug. I stamped this in VersaFine, and we know that that's a no-no if you want to use your Copics because it's going to bleed. You should use Memento. That's better to work with Copics. I don't like Memento for stamping regularly. I find that it's kind of splotchy, but I'm just going to be extra careful since I used my VersaFine for this. And as long as you don't like oversaturate the paper or run your marker back and forth across the ink, you'll be fine with it. It's not going to run. So I'm just going to go and color in my little coffee cup. You could always do it darker to make it look like hot chocolate, or maybe lighter for it to look like a tea. And I'm going to cut this one out. I'm going to cut the whole thing out from this one that I stamped in the white. And then when I cut out the red one, I'm only going to cut out a little portion of it. And a good trick for when you're cutting and paper piecing, a lot of people, your natural inclination might be to move your scissors to cut around an object, but it's actually easier and you'll get a smoother, cleaner cut if you rotate the paper and not your scissors. So there's the cup that I stamped in white and colored. And now I have the one that I stamped on red, and I am just going to use my scissors and cut out the part of it. And I put it on here to try and figure out what part I want to be red. I can't decide really if I want the cup portion to be red and the handle to be red too. I ended up deciding that I was just going to use the part that has the snowflake on it for the red, and I was going to leave the handle white. So I'm just going to very carefully go around and trim right up to the black stamped edge. And kind of see how I like it. I think it looks pretty good. Now, sometimes I'm a little OCD, so this white space between the handle and the cup is bothering me. Now I could have gone in with a marker and colored it in black, but I decided to make things more difficult for myself, and I cut the handle off, and I'm actually cutting out that little portion in between the handle and the mug so that when I adhere it down, you'll see the black cardstock. And like I said, you definitely, the easier thing would have been to just color in that little spot with my black marker that I already have out on the table. But why would I make my life easier? So once I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to start adhering everything on. And I'm going to use my scrapbook adhesives, Easy Dots, and these are permanent, but they're in the little dots versus a strip. So I'm going to get my pieces out. I'm going to be really liberal with my adhesive again. And I'm going to take that red piece and stick it on the top. And then when I take the whole cup and add it to the front of that card panel, I'm going to use some foam adhesive just to pop it up and give it some dimension. Because otherwise I think it might be just a little too flat. The nice thing about having a roll of foam adhesive versus the little squares or circles that you can buy kind of pre-packaged and pre-cut is that you can cut these strips to any size that you want. You're not, you're not limited. So I'm going to stick my mug on there. And then this was the fun part because I cut that teeny tiny little handle. I'm going to have to go in and cut some teeny tiny little pieces of foam adhesive so that I can stick that on and have it pop up and be the same as the mug itself. And like I said, this is where it's really handy that you have this whole roll of the adhesive, because I can cut the piece to whatever size I need it to be for my project. And I'll just peel off the backing and stick that little handle on there. Just kind of fiddle with it until I like it. And there we go. And I thought it looked kind of plain like this. I'm going to mount it onto a white card base, and it's a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 card base. And it looks really nice, I think, with the red cup. It really makes it pop. But I just wanted to add a little something more. So I think I'm going to add some twine, some red and white twine onto the sides of this. And to do this, I am just going to flip my black panel over, take some of my adhesive strips, and just do a few little strips in the corners. And this is really easy. What I'm going to do is take the twine that I have, just cut off, kind of eyeball it, cut off a really long piece, and I'm going to stick it on the back where I had put my adhesive. I'm just going to make sure I have enough down there. So I'll stick it on the back and wrap it around the front. and then I'll flip the cardstock over again and stick it on the back. And I'll just trim off the excess that I have. And it's stuck on there pretty good, but I'm actually going to go back and put some foam adhesive over top of it before I stick it onto my card base. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just wrap it around and stick it down. Now this might not work if you were planning on adhering this panel flat onto your card base, but I am going to pop mine up with some of that foam tape that I have. So I'm just going to rip off some pieces and stick it onto my card. The nice thing about the foam adhesive rolls too are they're really inexpensive and you really get a lot of product for your money. Because I go through a lot of this. So I'll just keep clipping and taping, and I don't know why I was cutting it with scissors because it rips really easily, so I could have just as easily been ripping it off. And I'm going to kind of skip over. Ta-da! Look at all that. So what I'm going to do now is just peel off all of the backing from the adhesive, and I'm going to stick it onto my card base. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and center it as best I can and push it down really well so that the foam tape sticks to the card base and everything is nice and flat. And there you have it. It was a pretty simple card to put together, something that you could probably mass produce pretty easily. And here it is, the finished product. Don't forget to head over to Amy's blog so that you can see all of the people who are hopping today and also link up your own projects. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.